Night of the Werewolves is a 2025 werewolf anthology movie. And as you'd probably guess from the title, it's a collection of short films all about lycanthropes, wolfmen, werewolves. And there is no wraparound story or anything like that. And so it's just a kind of a selection of different themed and different tonal styles of werewolf movies. So let's discuss. Now, with any anthology, obviously it's somewhat variable. This one I didn't even realise was an anthology, but before I started watching it, there are a couple of things I will say that I enjoyed, generally speaking. I think for the most part, maybe with the exception of one of the movies, the werewolves are actually quite well realised. And there's different styles. Our opening sequence, for example, it's a CGI werewolf, but it's very much in shadow. And I think it's done really well. And, I often see people say that the werewolf in the Van Helsing, the Hugh Jackman Van Helsing movie, is really good, but that's me that the CGI was not good in that movie. But in this, I gotta say, the way it's kind of animated and stuff looks very kind of athletic and stuff. And I thought, do you know what, this was a great opening. And there's a couple of other ones which are practical, where I think the werewolf costume or makeup are fairly effective. I mean, they're not all brilliant, but they're at least some of them are fairly good. We have one at the end, which is kind of like a comedy one. It's clearly taken inspiration from Shaun of the Dead, but it uses a practical werewolf suit. And although it's played for laughs, I still kind of quite like the werewolf suit and stuff. So the actual werewolves are, some of them are quite well realised. In some of the short films as well, there is some pretty decent cinematography. Certainly the first few movies, the first few short films, I did notice some quite well shot movies in a lot of ways, with some interesting eye for cinematography, kind of set decoration, things like this, lighting. So I thought some of the kind of the production design was quite well done on some of them. We have one movie which is kind of like deliberately meant to be a little crappy, and even in that one, I think some of the kind of the aesthetics, obviously kind of a little different from the rest, but they're sort of fun in a sort of over the top kind of like Tromaville sort of style way. To me, the most memorable story was the final one, which is the kind of the Shaun of the Dead one. It had the most sort of elements to me to make the characters the most memorable at the very least, and had a couple of kind of funny moments. For example, there's like a dog chew toy where the guy who meets this girl and comes back to her place, and she sort of says, "Oh, by the way, my housemate's a werewolf," and he sort of poo-poos it. He finds this kind of chew toy and throws it, and the werewolf kind of chases after it and stuff. So there was a couple of kind of sort of funnier moments in this. And obviously, where these films are quite short, I mean, they are different lengths. Some of them are more vignettes than anything. Some of them are kind of quite punchy and kind of quite well paced. And, there's some interesting kind of gothic kind of style design on some of these. So if you just want a short, sharp werewolf punch, then you may want to check these out. I actually think this is a film where it's not worth watching. I think you'll get the most of it if you watch this in pieces rather than kind of a long anthology, because I actually think that this does a disservice to this, because not a lot of these movies have a huge amount of story in them. If I'm honest, they're more about the visual spectacle, and when you're watching that on a repeated basis, it gets a little kind of tiresome, which leads me on to the negatives. So the actual stories of this movie are slight. A lot of them are minimal dialogue, very weak on characters, and some of them are just a little bizarre, and it almost feels like, what am I watching? It almost feels like you're watching someone's kind of like show reel for trying to do like directorial flourishes, or cinematography or VFX shots and things like this. So narrative-wise, it is extremely weak. Even on a short film, and the only movie that actually I felt has any type of genuine sort of story was the kind of the final one, which was the kind of the comedy one. There's kind of one which is a Japanese one, which maybe has a reasonable amount of dialogue, so at least you get some sort of kind of, I guess, feel for the characters. But for the most part, it is really lacking here. And I have to say as well, there is 2 short films that actually have a narration over them, where I feel like this was done after the fact, because the movie really didn't get across what was meant to be happening, or the extreme lack of dialogue was affecting the kind of the what you were supposed to get out of it. So they've recorded, I mean, this is my speculation, they've recorded narration over it, which it sort of explains what's happening on screen whilst you're watching it. This was terrible, I thought. So yeah, the real lack of narrative, even when the individual stories themselves. I mean, there's no overarching sort of through line with this movie. It's just a collection of different sort of werewolf films, and some of them even don't really feel like werewolf films, I have to say. But yeah, that's a real problem, because when you watch this as a collection, it gets tiresome, as I've said. So the better way to watch this is in parts, I think, or at least probably, you know, the shorts maybe on their own. It is just a mixed bag of quality. As I said, there's one which is meant to be particularly sort of silly and schlocky, but it's so at odds with the rest. It feels out of place. There's some odd choices in the movie. When this film opened up, and the first scene was where we have this kind of dark woods and this woman being chased by this CGI werewolf, of which I said I quite like the animation. I thought, wow, this is a really strong start. But then it ends up with 2 werewolves doing kung fu, and I'm thinking, what the hell am I watching? What is this? For no real reason, they're just doing kung fu. Alright? And there was my appreciation for that movie kind of flushed down the toilet a little bit, I have to say. Maybe it's meant to be just a bit of a funny joke, but it again, it just sort of comes out of nowhere. So, I've got to say, I felt this movie was really lacking in story. I think lacking in dialogue, lacking in characters. And the rest of it was kind of just variable quality of, you know, different kind of VFX or production design. I don't think it really works as an anthology, I have to say. I think there is some merit to some of these individual pieces. Maybe the way to go with this one would have been to have like a werewolf story, a zombie story, you know, a vampire story, something like that. To have your kind of your classic monsters. That might have been a bit more interesting. I think this just various different takes on the werewolf thing. Again, very similar, you know, very similar in the kind of the basic setup, and the story is so slight, it doesn't make it a particularly engaging film, particularly. I will give it a 4 out of 10, purely for, I think, some of the kind of, as I said, the technical elements, quite strong VFX, cinematography, but overall, it's a below average film. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.